Welcome to Sliders and Wings, a podcast about the TV show Sliders
and the TV show Wings
and all the other forgotten TV shows of the 90s.
I'm Valerie Temple.
And I'm Rachel Cox. And with us tonight is special guest Nicole Restaino.
Hi. Hi, guys.
Thanks for coming.
Hi, Nicole.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I'm so excited to be here. I love to talk about TV. I love to talk about pop culture.
You're in the right place, Nicole.
Yes. I really crammed for this one. Nicole gave us a lot of homework. Nicole had the great idea to not only do My So-Called Life, which is the show we're doing this week, but to also watch some of Euphoria, which is a contemporary show. The second season is airing now on HBO to kind of draw some parallels between the two. So we had to watch about 500 hours of that.
You assigned us 3 episodes of Euphoria, but you assigned us 3 episodes from the second season. And I'm such a completist that I was like, well, I might as well watch the whole first season.
Did you watch the first season?
Okay. I did. So I have a lot of thoughts.
I really enjoyed jumping into the second season because I felt like it was a real time saver. I don't ever feel the need to go back.
And there was actually, because of COVID, such a break between the first and second season that they ended up scrapping a lot of the second season plots and rewriting it. So there actually are a lot of things that aren't that contiguous between the two, and you can jump into the second season more easily. I think I had actually forgotten why Fezco and Nate even beefed, because it had been so long. So carrying the plots over from the first season, especially because we'll get to this later, but I don't think the central thing about this television show is its plot at all. It's easier to jump in than others. And it starts off with that whole Fezco's grandma theme. The cold opens, there's sort of plays within a play, so you don't need any background really.
I had to read a little bit, but it wasn't too extensive. 10 minutes on the wiki and you're caught up. We also did some research on My So-Called Life. I didn't find any criticism from the time. I guess a lot of more articles about it looking back. Did you all read the article that Val sent?
I did. Okay. I read it today.
That was kind of a hard read because a lot of it was just about, so there's this internet, see?
Oh my God, I was dying. They were like, and the thing about America Online is...
So that was so funny because it was basically an academic writing a paper about a very early fan forum for My So-Called Life. Probably the first articles about TV fan culture.
But primordial, fan culture.
The reason you couldn't find any writing on it is because people didn't write about television in the same way. You're at the break of the start of prestige TV in the 90s. And let's say Twin Peaks is its own thing and it kind of lives by itself for about 5 years. And then you start getting an influx of prestige television and it becomes part of mainstream criticism conversations, the same way film and art are. I actually think it's not because people were avoiding So-Called Life, but because the role of television in visual culture, and also there's just so much more to be written now, right? Vulture has to be filled.
A TV recap is really a product of the internet, filling pages. Can you imagine a newspaper printing a recap of what happened on each show?
Yet I live for them.
Almost every night after Greg and I watch whatever we're watching at the time, he's like, better get on your phone, read that recap, see what everyone else thought. I was like, shut up.
Everyone's take on what you just watched.
I'm not. I'm looking at the Reddit page. Shut up. I'm like, well, everyone on Reddit thinks that this is going to happen. So 2 weeks ago, we did Sisters with Bennett. But for example, we did find a piece of contemporary criticism, and it was just not the intense scrutiny that you would expect today, like a New Yorker profile on the show. It was a quick review of 3 different shows that are on the air right now that are about siblings, and Sisters was one of them. It was very skimmy.
It was very brief. It was as if there wasn't enough to talk about with just one show. They're like, let's cram in 3 shows and just sort of touch on all 3. Whereas now, not only are you talking about one show, but you're digging in deep to each episode.
This week, Vulture published 4 pieces about Euphoria. It did the recap, an interview with the woman playing Faye, who is the heroin addict girlfriend. There was a piece on doubling and narcissism in Euphoria. And then someone did a 3-paragrapher about how great Zendaya is. And I'm like, I know, no one had to write that. Come on.
We're doing My So-Called Life, which we actually didn't originally have on the list because we never felt that it was forgotten, but it is streaming on Hulu, but it's no Seinfeld or Friends.
And I also think it's not forgotten for people our age, but I do not think that a lot of people younger than us have watched it. I mean, it was a 1-season wonder. It made a huge impact on us, but what is the reach of it at this point? People always reference My So-Called Life. It's a real touchstone, but for people who haven't watched the show, it's very contextless.
It's kind of a punchline for like teenage girl angst. So a little bit from Wikipedia, it was an American teen drama television series created by Winnie Holzman and produced by Edward Zwick and Marshall Herskovitz. It originally aired on ABC from August 94 to January 1995. It was set at the fictional Liberty High School in a fictional suburb near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and it follows the emotional travails of several teenagers in the social circle of main character Angela Chase, played by Claire Danes. And then it was canceled in 95, despite being critically praised for its portrayal of adolescence and the commentary of its central character Angela, and for receiving several major awards nominations, including Danes winning the Golden Globe for her acting work. Besides Danes, the show also launched the careers of several other major actors of her generation, including Jared Leto and Wilson Cruz. And the character that Wilson Cruz played,
Ricky,
I was like, Freddie. Ricky was like the first openly gay teen, or
the first openly gay teen cast member. And it was played by an openly gay actor, which was pretty notable as well, I think. The gay characters prior to this, the notable ones were like Billy Crystal on Soap.
Oh, this is interesting. Alicia Silverstone auditioned before Claire Danes and impressed the producer who wanted to cast her as Angela.
Alicia Silverstone was emancipated. Claire Danes wasn't. They liked her, and also she could work the long hours. So that was like another plus for her. But they ended up going with Claire Danes. It sounds like them actually going with an actual 15-year-old ended up being part of the demise of the show.
Oh, because they had to increase the screen time for the parents because Claire Danes had to actually attend school.
But also, from what I read, it sounded like she wasn't interested in continuing with a second season. She was kind of overwhelmed with the workload. Ratings were kind of low, even though it was critically acclaimed. And then there was some question about whether or not Claire Danes even wanted to continue on. And so that was the network's excuse. They're like, well, let's just cancel it.
I'm glad that Alicia didn't get cast and we lived to see her as Cher Horowitz, and both total icons of that time period. And they're both, I wouldn't call either of them superstars right now, but they're working actresses. Like you see them both in something every year.
Alicia Silverstone played the mom in the Wimpy Kid movie, and I had to sit through that, and I was like, she forgot how to act.
Actually in a lot of stuff, like smaller movies, more indie stuff.
She was in Killing of a Sacred Deer
and The Lodge.
Pretty good. I like Alicia Silverstone. I will always have a soft spot for her. She's amazing as Cher Horowitz, but I am glad they went with Claire Danes, just because to me, Claire Danes, her look is so much more regular girl to me. I think Alicia Silverstone is a little bit too pretty.
And I couldn't imagine her doing this serious.
Yeah, so angsty. I don't see it either, but they are actresses, so who knows?
They were both my flat-chested role models. Itty bitty titty committee, president, vice president.
Claire Danes, she's not plain or anything, but she seems a little less sparkly. To me, Alicia Silverstone reads as a popular girl, which is why it makes so much sense that she was so good as Cher, because she is the king popular girl. And Angela Chase is supposed to be a lot more introspective and shy and awkward. And I think the casting of Claire Danes just works so much better for what I think the show is trying to do.
The crux of the show, what sparks this only season of My So-Called Life, is that Angela Chase kind of has this identity crisis, and she doesn't want to be this goody two-shoes nerdy girl anymore. It's kind of like Freaks and Geeks. You know, she doesn't want to be nerdy and uncool anymore. So she grabs a new best friend who's kind of crazy, and that's the Rayanne character. And she dyes her hair red. And apparently in the first episode, it's this whole big thing that she dyes her hair red. It's such a big deal. And her mother's very upset.
I love the dye job on that. Feels very a relatable teen to me. It's not very polished.
It is no one's natural color, but it's not cool enough to be punk either.
Right. It doesn't look great. It's all over the same color. It's just this flat red, and it's not really even a cool red. It's not a punky red. did. It's just different
than what she was.
It's meaningful to her, but it's not visually that special.
The academic article kind of got into how girls in fandom at the time would also dye their hair that color, and how the fandom was this whole experiential lifestyle choice.
Dyeing your hair a cool color was always something I wanted to do as a teen. Never did. But usually it's more of like a manic panic kind of choice.
Right. Did MTV re-air it the next year?
Yeah.
Okay, that's why I thought it was on MTV. That's when I watched it.
I'm actually not totally sure that I've seen every episode. I think I watched every episode when it was on DVD in the early 2000s or something. I don't think I was a super fan, but I did watch it a bit.
I didn't watch it at all when it was on the air, but this show is so talked about that in the early days of Hulu, I think it was added to Hulu right when Hulu started. And I was like, well, I'm going to watch My So-Called Life. And it did feel a little like when I read The Catcher in the Rye in my 20s instead of as a teen, where I was like, maybe I experienced this at the wrong time. Not that I don't like it or whatever, but it probably would have been more meaningful to me had I watched it when I was actually like 14, 15.
Yeah, and television is different, so your expectations are different, right? Like you have these TV shows now that are essentially like the artistic equivalent of filmmaking. It's shot on set. You're not going to be like, oh my God, this is breaking ground.
It's a really small scale show. The stakes are kind of low. It is about a girl who gets a new friend.
The whole time I was watching Euphoria, I was like, it's very unfair to compare My So-Called Life to this. That's just unfair.
I think it says so much about how television has changed, though, and how addiction and other topics like that are not just talked about in public, but how the opioid crisis has impacted this country and how an everyday person is a drug addict. This idea that there's sort of this othering of the addict, or they come from a bad home, or there's this, this background like, oh my gosh, she's a whispering kind of thing. And now you have anybody can end up with a serious drug addiction, not like alcohol, but we're talking like fentanyl.
Watching Euphoria, though, does make me feel bad for the teens of today because they are so jaded and used to all of this that it doesn't seem shocking to them to see someone overdose. That's really sad to me.
I don't think it's very realistic at all in that sense. I found it hard to watch, but not as a parent. Like, I'm not looking at them clutching my pearls. It's over the top. It's like Gossip Girl. It's just in this very specific time and place that where you're just like, well, people like that don't act that way here. I'm not saying that drug addiction doesn't happen here. I'm just saying I don't look at that and think, oh no, this is what all the teenagers are doing. For starters, these are all 25-year-olds.
Alexa Demi, who plays Maddie, is in her 30s. The rest of the cast is somewhere between 24 and 28.
Do you know that Alexa Demi is Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys' granddaughter?
I did not know that.
Isn't that crazy? But again, they need these adults so that they're emancipated, so they can work these long hours.
When you see My So-Called Life, I see real life. When I see Euphoria, I see a fake version of high school, much like 90210 and Gossip Girl, where like no one is doing homework and no one is barely ever seeing their parents and they're acting like adults. And I know this is on purpose, but you don't know what time of day it is or what day of the week it is or anything. It jumps around a lot. In my mind, it's like midnight and someone calls Jules up and it's like, want to go bowling? I'm like, isn't it like 3 a.m.? What's going on? Like,
yeah,
it's so disorienting. And then they just all go bowling. Is it 8? Is it 10? Is it 12? They live in this like fictional LA suburb where you can just bike from one end to the other,
yes,
I guess.
The fictional LA suburb kills me. There are some people who are convinced it's Fresno, and there's all these Reddit theories about whether it is or isn't. But I think that in part is because the show focuses on aesthetic and there's no linear narrative to it. So those sort of formal pieces are at play, but you also, I think, are supposed to be disoriented by the narrator. She's a drug addict. She's an unreliable narrator. She never knows what's going on. And I think they convey that through how the show is done formally. And then it's an A24 show. It's the only television show A24 has produced that I know of. So it's super interested in the aesthetics and breaking narrative conventions and other things like that. So you have all these things going on that do make you feel completely discombobulated all of the time.
I think it's a really well-made show. I do think it's like if Quentin Tarantino made a TV show about kids.
I mean, the Fezco's grandma cold open is a Tarantino movie.
There was a big act of violence in the season 2 opener. Is there any violence in the first season?
Oh yeah, tons.
It just seems like very Tarantino-ish to me. And like the overuse of music.
I love the overuse of music though.
From what I understand from reading about the general criticisms of Euphoria, I kind of agree with it. It's well done, acting's great, style-wise great, but it's a little bit style over substance and manipulative. I went to go see a movie with my kids called Sing 2. I am starting to feel that when I watch something and an emotion wells up in me, I used to just feel like I'm connecting with art. I'm having like a human visceral emotion reaction to art, and that's good. And now I'm starting to feel manipulated. I watched Sing 2, which is just a gobbledygook nonsense movie about basically animals going to Las Vegas and just singing top 40 hits.
That was fun.
But there's a point at the emotional climax of the show, and I started crying. I felt like it was, because they have all this data. This key change makes people cry, or you do bam, 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 and then people start crying. Like there's all these juxtapositions and tricks that they can use to make you cry. And I'm starting to just feel that all the time now, and it's creeping me out. And that's how I felt about Euphoria. When you play a really awesome song, that's just like a really awesome song, I'm a little more forgiving of whatever is happening on the show. Because I'm like, well, this song's great.
I feel manipulated by Euphoria into liking the boys that I hated to start with. I hate that I like Fezco so much.
Everyone, that's everybody's struggle.
The first episode, I am impressed with myself that I made it all the way through as many episodes that I watched, because I really hated the first episode of Euphoria, the pilot episode. It starts with a baby in a womb. Zendaya's voiceover saying that she was happy when she was in utero, and then her life started off on a bad note when she was crushed by her mother's cervix. And then it cuts to footage of 9/11. Then she was like, I was born 3 days after 9/11. And I was like, whoa, I hate this show already. It got better from there, but that first episode, it felt like pretentiousness and style mashed together into like a very not pleasing package for me. So like, it's a really interesting journey for me that I was so annoyed with Fezco in the first episode, and now he's my favorite character, and I'm truly worried about what's going to happen to him.
The morally ambiguous central character is something that's been part of prestige television. They are criminals, they are scammers, and you still somehow like them. I think what's different about this show is that the morally ambiguous person at the center is a young woman, as opposed to a really machismo man. Tony Soprano has this whole history of American obsession with the mafia behind him. Walter White's sort of this like wild, wild west entrepreneurial figure. Don Draper's just an everyday cad. Of course, people talk about how they were morally ambiguous characters that you still loved and felt attached to. But I feel like there's sort of this shock about, why do I care about Rue? She's a piece of garbage who doesn't care about anyone around her. Or Fezco, I feel torn about him. I feel like we've been dealing with those characters for a long time. And the difference now is that they're teenagers or alleged teenagers playing teenagers.
Right. One of my criticisms, though, of the second season of Euphoria is that I almost feel like it's barely about Rue.
Even with those 2 episodes that were really...
That's the thing. Just because she's featured heavily in 2 episodes at the end of the season doesn't make it a full arc for the season. That doesn't make her the main character of the show.
Still, from her perspective, she is in every episode in that way, but I have heard other people saying things like that. They were like, oh, well, maybe they just wanted to flesh out some of the other characters. I don't know.
So My So-Called Life also used voiceover. They also used that voiceover to flesh out other characters. Angela is the main narrator of the show, obviously. She's our star. And the show is about the interior life of a teen. But then there are 2 episodes that are narrated by other characters. One being her weird next door neighbor, Brian Krakow, and her little baby sister.
Yeah, I forgot about that. I certainly didn't forget she was the narrator. It's really only a couple of years before you start seeing things like Sex and the City. And I know it's a completely different tone and it's a completely different setting, but in a way, I wonder how much those things are related. Did it crack open a door enough to make things like that possible?
One of the articles I think we all read really made me think about the writing of her voiceovers specifically, how it was very realistic in that it was sometimes really poignant and smart and sometimes super dumb. And this show allowed that duality of a teen. You never really know what you're going to get because this person is still forming their brain. Just seeing her voiceover written out on the page, it was making me laugh. These are really good lines. This is some really excellent writing.
And there is the commonality because the episode we watched, Other People's Mothers, Rayanne has a drug overdose and almost dies. Just like
ecstasy, right? Like, I don't even think you can OD. I think it's like the one thing you can't OD on, but anyway.
She was drinking too. She's basically like drunk the whole episode almost, right?
Yes, she's like drinking in school. The opening scene of this episode, Angela comes home with Rayanne and Ricky, and Rayanne grabs a beer from Angela's parents' fridge and goes upstairs, and then their mom catches them. And the mother's just like, give me that back. I know this mother's supposed to be a hard ass, but this mother's very calm. I would have murdered these children. Imagine you come in and your teenager's just holding a beer.
You'd be like, you're out of here.
You're out of here, toots. But I wanted to give my spiel about permissive parenting in the West. So I was just listening to a podcast. It was an interview with Amy Chua. She's the one who wrote Tiger Mom. And she was talking a lot about the paradox of growing up as an immigrant child is that you get this unique experience that you can't really duplicate for your children. So she's raised by immigrants and they taught her to work hard, and it's like life or death. Like, you have to work hard, you have to achieve because this is our only chance. And then no matter how much you then push that next generation of kids, you can't really instill that because there's actually not that fear of failure there because there's a cushion and everyone has been raised up economically. She talked a lot about how people in the East think that parents in the West are too permissive. So this episode, Other People's Mothers, compares Angela's mother with Rayanne's mother. So Rayanne's mother is like a tarot card reading hippie single mom who goes out on dates. She's fun. And Angela's drawn to her because she's so different from her mom. And she goes over to Rayanne's house and Rayanne's mom is reading their tarot cards and she's a cool mom. I'm not like a regular mom. I'm a cool mom. And Angela's very drawn to that because her mother's very traditional. She's not like friendly mom.
Rayanne's mom, by the way, is played by a very cool lady, like in real life. Her name is Patty D'Arberville. And she dated Cat Stevens and Don Johnson. She was a model. She was in a bunch of Andy Warhol projects.
Oh.
So she's very cool. You know the Cat Stevens song, Wild World?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's about her.
In the episode, we see making comparisons between the two moms, a very strict, overbearing mom who's just always, annoying her. And then the cool mom that lets Rayanne do whatever while Rayanne is drinking and doing drugs. And then Rayanne has a big party because her mom just isn't there. And Rayanne ends up overdosing. But not only that, the mom shows up and doesn't realize how much danger Rayanne is in and goes back out. And then Angela calls her mom and her mom comes and takes Rayanne and saves her life. I guess I just found a comparison between traditional domineering parenting and permissive Western style parenting. One of the ideas in child rearing is that it is kind of okay to be a benevolent dictator because even though when you're a kid, you want your parents to be cool and have fun with you, what you want subconsciously is rules and order. You don't want to be able to do whatever you want.
I don't think any of us grew up in a permissive parenting household.
No, not at all. Oh my God.
The girls who were like, my mom has always been my best friend. I'm like, what the actual fuck?
There was one time I was, I think, 10 and I came home from school, got off the bus, and my friend was like, do you want to come over to my house? And I was like, sure. Went over to her house for like maybe an hour. Came back to my house and my mom was furious at me. She didn't know where I was. She's like, you never do this again. That scared me to death. I just can't even imagine Euphoria.
However, I will say the one thing that I do find interesting about Euphoria is it flips this idea that the addict's parent or the permissive and cool. It's like Rue is one of the only ones who has this parent who does constantly insert themselves in their lives and yet they still couldn't.
The most permissive parent, Alana Ubach, the drunk mom, one of her daughters is Lexi, who's like very straight and narrow. So the show is a little bit of a commentary on that. I think in the Other People's Mothers episode of My So-Called Life, there is a implied lesson at the end. The show kind of takes the side of the stricter parent, whereas Euphoria, all bets are off. They're not making any sort of judgment in that way.
The scene with Rayanne and the overdosing reminded me of the abortion scene from Dirty Dancing. Baby realizes there's like, Daddy, come fix this problem.
Very much so. And I think that's really real as a teen when you realize you're in over your head. I don't know what to do.
I thought it was hilarious that they went to the ER, had a whole visit, checked her in, and like were able to go back and commence the party.
Yeah, there was still
you were there for 8 hours, bitch.
That party was still going on. Like an adult people party too. Not a rager, just like a family get together. Was just still happening.
There were a couple of really funny lines from the episode. There's a whole, I don't know if you call it a subplot. The adults plot of the My So-Called Life episode is that Angela's mom is throwing an anniversary party for her parents. So her mother is domineering and she kind of like railroads her into hosting the party. And then like right when the party's starting, her dad doesn't even show up.
Angela wants to go out and they're like, well, you have to go to your grandma's party. She's like, my grandma's not even here. Yeah, what do I have to go? And I was like, that's an excellent point. As a parent, you have no legs there. There's nothing you can do because she has you.
But the funny thing was that the grandmother insisted on serving turkey and she just bought a turkey and put it in the fridge. And then the dad looks in the fridge and he goes, to put something that large in someone's refrigerator without someone's permission.
I actually think the parents on My So-Called Life are fantastic. Mm-hmm. They have a real role in the show, and their relationship and their interactions with one another are pretty realistic.
Oh, yeah.
The only other example I can think of where there's a realistic depiction of marriage, where it isn't perfect and the adults have really fleshed out characters, is Friday Night Lights. But in a way, Coach and Tammy are as much of main characters as the kids in Friday Night Lights. Like there's not as much divide, where My So-Called Life is really from the perspective of Angela, but they give her parents a full and very realistic life. But Friday Night Lights, I feel like, is half Coach and Tammy's story, half the children of the town, including their own daughter.
There was one other funny line when the mom comes in, she storms into Rayanne's party, and there's a guy who's on top of Rayanne, and she's kind of passed out, and she rips him off, and he goes, hey, I'm just an artist trying to make a living.
I was like, what?
Speaking of music direction, the music from this episode of My So-Called Life was so good. So first they play When Will We Fall Down by Toad the Wet Sprocket, which was my dad's favorite band of the 90s. And then they play this song, which was from the Reality Bites soundtrack. So I've heard it 5 bazillion times, which is Spin the Bottle by Juliana Hatfield.
Oh, my favorite. And then I watched the Christmas episode where Juliana Hatfield plays a homeless person who turns out to be a homeless ghost.
Yes, and the episode was ridiculous other than the casting of Juliana Hatfield, which is brilliant and perfect.
But she does have a funny speaking voice. She's like, talks like this. Oh, it's so cold out here. I have no home. And you're like, oh.
That episode is just such a bust. I think you made an interesting point about how Other People's Mothers does kind of have a lesson, and the story does take someone's side, but subtly so. Like Rayanne's mother still comes home and she is concerned when she realized how big of a party they were having and other things like that.
Although it is more selfish. It's like, you're messing up my house.
True.
She's not concerned about the kids' welfare.
True. But there's a little bit of give and take there. But if you think Euphoria is fully holding out on moral judgment, that Christmas episode is a very special episode.
Oh, it is.
Lesson to be learned, and it is difficult to watch because it's like, let's pick a social issue and talk to everyone about it. And it felt so weird. And I feel like that is very much a 90s thing. And that felt very of the time. And the show was almost a little too good for that, right? Because when they tried to do it, the tone was so different.
Right.
Like every other episode.
They lay it on really thick too. It's just oppressive how schmaltzy it is. I think the B plot of the episode involves the mom wants to go to church more. She's trying to talk to the dad about it. She's like, I want us to start going to church more. And he's like, well, you can. But then it's like a whole thing because they end up at a church at the end because that's where the homeless teens are all being housed. So it's this magical thing and it's just gross.
They did not resolve world homelessness, if you can believe it, with one very special episode.
I mean, can you believe Claire Danes is great on the show, but she is constantly shocked by things and confused by things. And her reaction to just meeting a homeless person or being in a place where homeless people are, you're just like, come on, girl. She treats it as if it is like the wildest thing she could ever witness. Mother, I saw a girl and she doesn't have a home. And you're like, okay, you're not 4 years old. You know, I get that you're a teen, but you'd think you'd be a little bit more savvy by then.
I don't want to think of anything I said before age 28. So horrible.
Same.
I mean, I know she doesn't play a major role in either of the My So-Called Life episodes we're talking about, but I do have to give a shout out to Sharon Chernsky and say that felt very realistic as a teenager then, and still feels very realistic. The Sharon Chernsky and Angela and the Lexi Rue thing are basically cut out of the same template, and they still play the exact same 30 years later. And I find that really interesting. And I think it says a lot about
like friends drifting apart.
The childhood friend, you drift apart. The ones stays kind of goody-ish.
That's what Ghost World is about. It's about best friends that grew up together and they are slowly realizing that they're different people and maybe don't vibe together as much anymore. It's a painful thing to have to deal with.
There's an article that just was in the latest issue of The Atlantic about just how hard it is to make friends as an adult.
Ooh.
It's something like you lose, 85% of your friends by the time when you're 25, you have the most friends you're ever going to have. And it's just like dips.
Oh God, just a nosedive. Every time you lose one, your ratio keeps getting worse and worse.
You're not replacing them.
And I think that with the pandemic and working from home and then also having differing opinions about various things, I think that people have even fewer associates or acquaintances. I have these 3 people that I can actually talk to without fighting, and then no one else.
The pandemic totally decimated an entire category of friendship.
Right.
Acquaintances plus. You're more than acquaintances. You're friends of a friend. You enjoy hanging out with this person, but you're never really going to make special plans with them. That's gone. It is gone. It's kind of sad.
A friend of mine called me today and I assumed that someone was in the hospital. What's wrong?
They were like, hi.
I want to say hi. And I was like, don't scare me like that.
Aaron loves calling people. He's the guy that he gets frustrated with a text exchange that goes on too long. He'll just cut it off and call. And people don't like that. No. He'll be texting with someone and then he'll just be like, screw it. I don't want to text any longer. I'll just call them. And then he'll call them in the middle.
And they don't pick up.
And they don't pick up.
We text. I get it.
He's baffled by it, but I get it too.
I have another question about Euphoria. The clothes are baffling. I don't know if that is how kids dress.
I don't think so.
Okay. Is it stylized? In episode 3, Cassie gets up at 4 a.m. to get all dressed. And then they both show up and they're wearing the exact same thing. And it's something you'd see in that store on East Chestnut Street.
Rainbow or something.
All spandex. They're in school.
Tummies out. There's no dress code at this school.
It's a jacket with no bra or shirt underneath. And it's just pinned right in the middle between the 2 boobs. And there's nothing else. And then hip huggers and it's all spandex. I'm just completely perplexed.
I think that style is actually influencing the fashion of teens today.
It's the other way. And I also think that it just takes an exaggerated version and again, like over stylizes and over aestheticizes something that sort of exists out there. Like the makeup, quote unquote, festival makeup, Y2K blended with festival makeup was kind of making its way back into the mainstream. You're seeing a lot more color on eyeshadow. You were seeing like maybe a couple rhinestones here and there. And then Euphoria took it and did a full-blown take on that. And now that's pushed back into culture. People are mimicking the show, which was simply over-styling something that was kind of coming back into the aesthetics of everyday anyway.
Kind of like what Clueless did. The fashion of Clueless was not really the fashion of that time until people watched Clueless and they're like, maybe I should try that out. I do like a plaid pleated skirt. Yeah, that looks pretty cute. I like knee highs. I am obsessed with the makeup and hair on Euphoria, especially when I think about it in relation to My So-Called Life. I think the 90s was just a lot less polished. Like, imagine Angela Chase now. She would have watched a YouTube tutorial on how to dye her hair. And I think that the look of Euphoria, the hair and the makeup, especially, the subtext of that is the internet, the access to information. We're watching these elaborate YouTube makeup tutorials and learning how to do all of that stuff. And teens didn't have that in the 90s. It was a lot more raw. I think that's why I relate more to Angela, because I look at pictures of myself from when I was a teen. I don't know what I was doing. I didn't even really start wearing makeup until I was in my 20s. And I don't even think you could get away with not wearing makeup at all today. They wear too much makeup. They're slathering it on, they're contouring.
They're polished, but they're not. Or maybe it's just so high res that it's just unforgiving.
Right.
Of course, they're all beautiful. I'm not doubting that, but you can see imperfections because they're so up close on them all the time.
Zendaya's skin legitimately is intentionally worse this season because she's
I can tell that was
opioids more, and that does wreak havoc on your skin. Zendaya is actually, now that you pointed out, sort of a visual foil to the rest of them. I mean, Lexi doesn't go as over the top with her makeup, but she still has sort of a more polished early aughts look. It's very like Jennifer Aniston and Friends. And then Rue is like a total 90s girl. Skater clothes and very little makeup.
Much more androgynous, loose fitting, big baggy pants, maybe a crop top, but there's no sex appeal to it, which felt very 90s to me. There's a lot less overt sexiness, I think, to 90s fashion.
In the 2.5 episodes I watched, I barely saw any of this character, but what I saw was very, very funny, which was Kat. The dream sequence with the Viking coming in, killing her boyfriend and having his way with her, like speaking to her in Swedish or Norwegian or something. And then the other one was she was being bombarded with self-help slogans from social media.
Body positivity aphorisms that are just like oppressive to her.
Yeah, but I thought that was really insightful.
I think I would have liked that more had season 2 Kat seem at all related to season 1 Kat.
I mean, there are rumors that her and Sam Levinson got into it and he demoted her.
The rumor that I heard is that he wanted her to have an eating disorder in the 2nd season, and she was like, no. Then he just cut everything that he was going to do with her. Rachel, in the 1st season, Kat is a cam girl. She decides to be a cam girl, and then she starts earning all of this money. She's basically like a dominatrix by the end of the 1st season. The outfit she wears to prom, when she turns to her mom and she's like, do I look stupid? And her mom's like, no, you look beautiful. And she is wearing leather straps, so intricate. She looks like a hoe, babe. That was my mom. She wouldn't like take that off. Do you look stupid? No, but you're not leaving the house dressed like that. I almost feel like season 2 is where the show should have started, and then they should have swapped spots, because you can see Kat from where she is in this season evolving, maybe getting that confidence or whatever. But for her to go through that arc in season 1, and now it seems like there is no remnant of any of that confidence, it just seems really bizarre to me.
Yeah.
And messy.
Is the thing with the boyfriend that he won't have sex with her?
No, he's just boring. She's like kind of over him. They meet in season 1, but she is funny and her bits are insightful. The other outfit that really stands out from season 1, other than her prom outfit, is when she goes to the mall. Talks about being a fat girl with confidence.
It's great. Yeah, I really like that character, and I was kind of disappointed. The promise of what that character was going to become was not fulfilled to me. But she is funny when Cassie's upset and she comes downstairs. She puts on that bathing suit. And Kat's like, well, that's a choice.
I
Very
mean,
funny.
I'm just hoping that we get back to some of them in season 3. I mean, people after season 1, especially because they had to take the COVID break and they had time to rewrite, people were begging for more Fezco. People were begging for the Fezco backstory. People wanted a Cal backstory. And that academic article we read about My So-Called Life in fan communities, some of season 2 of Euphoria is bowing to fan communities. As a showrunner, as a creative head of something like that, I don't know if that's what you should do, because some of it makes it feel disjointed.
If they are writing to what the fans are demanding, I don't think that's the way it really should work.
There's no evidence of that per se, but I'm just sort of piecing things together. They couldn't film because of COVID. They really did throw away a lot of script of season 2 and almost completely rewrite it. Some of it is allegedly Kat getting written out because of the fight with Sam Levinson. Some of it is filling in holes that people wanted to see filled in. Fezco's backstory and also Cal's story, I loved the way both of those were done, and I loved them, and I'm glad that they're in there, but there's just this disjointedness to the whole thing.
I also think both of those backstories, I'm like, how old are they supposed to be? Fezco's grandma, this seems like a story from the 70s, yet Fezco is part of it.
The whole show has a 70s vibe. It's like Boogie Nights.
And then Cal is very 80s.
That made no sense.
It makes no sense.
A
like,
lot
this
of people question
timeline.
the Cal one. Like, if you go to the recap Vulture comments, people are all, there was no factual alignment on this.
No, it makes no sense.
doesn't.
They make it seem like he was a teen in 1985. The older brother is 20. That would have been 2001, baby. That makes no sense. He's like listening to In Excess.
The second season's supposed to pick up exactly where season 1 dropped off, right? So like they're still in the same year of school.
They're on like winter break and they go to that New Year's party. The music in the first episode was literal perfection.
I have been playing right down the line on Echo.
It's so good. They really used the music to separate the 3 stories that they told in the first episode. Fezco's grandma's a cold open. It's its own separate thing. And then we have the Lori circle and the teen party circle, the 90s hip hop and the really great 70s music. I mean, Dirty Work. All day long, I could listen to that song. And down the line,
They played Down the Line twice. They played again in episode 2. She's doing drugs with
Elliot.
Elliot's hot.
Yeah, he's cute. He's dating Hunter Schafer in real
I
life.
know.
Was anyone else confused though? The Lori scene and then the party scene. Maybe I wasn't giving it my full attention because I was doing stuff while I was watching, but I thought we were having a time jump and it was earlier that night. I didn't know which had happened first.
I think Lori's house happened first and then they went to the party.
But what happens at Lori's house is so crazy. And then they're like just
Right.
relaxing at a party.
Well, this is again, was it midnight? Was it the fact that as soon as we go back to Rue's perspective and as soon as we're away from Lori and we're in that car, she's singing along to Tupac lyrics. The way they use the music to separate and frame stories, I thought was really good. And they use the popular music. And then of course there's the guy who writes the score. And I think the score is really gorgeous as well. Labyrinth is his name.
There were some time jumps in the episodes I watched. Her narrative will take you back in time into something. And I'm not a fan of that. I feel like time jumps at this point are very shticky and are overdone. If I was Rue's mother though, wouldn't you just be like, you can't go out?
Right.
You get more of Rue's mom as the
Okay.
season goes on. You think of her being not a single parent by choice.
Yeah.
Drunk mom is a single parent. I don't know that she wanted that divorce to happen, but there are certain things. Rue's mom is very much like, was never meant to be raising these children alone. And she's a little heartbreaking too, I think.
I highlighted a couple of paragraphs from the academic paper, which is called Saving Our So-Called Lives, the one that talks about the girl forums. That was kind of interesting. She's talking about teenage girls and fandom. She mentions some academic called Barbara Hudson. Barbara Hudson asserts that the discourses of adolescence and femininity are subversive of one another, creating a set of conflicting expectations for the teenage girl. She describes adolescence as a masculine construct, embodying images of rebellion, restlessness, resistance, and the like, that contradicts a girl's attempt to become a patriarchally defined feminine, demure, perhaps even silent young woman. The dissonance created out of this dichotomy is one that leads a girl to feel uncomfortable with either signifier. Therefore, the narrative pleasure that My So-Called Life allows these girls and the interpretive practices that it activates foster an important imaginary space that permits them some freedom to negotiate and define themselves in relation to cultural expectations.
I think it's interesting that we talked a little bit about Rue and her being much more androgynous than the other women. In both of these these shows, you have the sort of rebellious girl narrator who's a little more androgynous. So you have these androgynous, rebellious, central female characters who are surrounded by these women acting out this complete femininity. That's the case in both the shows. Rayanne's style is 90s, but she swings that sexuality around like nobody's business.
I thought Rayanne was the coolest person I'd ever seen before. When I first saw My So-Called Life, still think that. Obviously, she's a mess, but she is very cool. You can see why Angela is drawn to her. What I do think is interesting about My So-Called Life is that Angela's mom is atypical in that she makes more money. She's the breadwinner for the family. And that causes some of the tension with the parents. I thought that was an interesting dynamic that I don't think I'd ever seen on TV before.
Since then, it has kind of become a trope, like the insecure male losing his position. This dad definitely doesn't fall into that category. He's kind of passive.
It's like a very mild midlife crisis almost.
Yeah, it's just like in Sisters. I mean,
Right.
that husband lost his job and went crazy.
But there's almost an adolescent quality about him as well, in that it doesn't seem like he ever figured out what he wanted to do with his life. He likes to cook. There's like a feminine thing about that, and he turns that into a career. Chefs are, I think, stereotypically pretty masculine, culinary rock stars, and then women are home cooks.
Let me read one more paragraph. Speaking of Rayanne, the identification with and fantasy of Angela may also be charged with a type of crush. These crushes are commonly experienced by teen girls and often involve a friend, teacher, or mentor. This phenomenon has been attributed to both a stage of increased bisexual feelings in women, which is due to the complexity of a girl's early Oedipal period, as well as the positioning of the female spectator. Nancy Chodorow asserts that a girl's puberty is characterized by bisexual wavering and indecisiveness about the relative importance to the girls of females and males. The attachment and subsequent homoeroticism felt for a female ideal who is not her mother may be part of this process of the retention of a girl's connection to other females while she moves toward an attachment to her father. In addition, the fluidity of female spectatorship may bring with it the conflation of the desire to be and to have, leading a girl to hold on to the feeling of a crush. There are sexual crushes and there are platonic crushes where you kind of want to embody somebody or be like somebody.
Single white female.
Yeah, like that.
I do think that there's something romantic about a best friendship. When you fall into a deep friendship with someone, it is almost like falling in love. It starts out sort of the same way. There's a flirtation. I think I like this person. I wonder if they like me. There is crossover of the emotions and the feelings that it evokes. I feel like in Euphoria, they almost talked about that with Jules and Rue, but then they just fully went with them being a couple, which I almost think is less interesting.
So in a way, there's two types of relationships. There's familial kinship and then there's non-kinship. So it makes sense that a kinship relationship is just this one way where you have to get along with someone, they're from your family or your kinship group. And then there's the people you encounter. And almost everyone that you encounter and form relationships with, you are doing some sort of dance like that. Like you don't have to do that with your kin. And that leads me to another question I had, which is about the backstory with Nate's dad, Cal, and he had an addiction to porn or something. And Nate is messed up because he was exposed to pornographic videos of his dad when he was 11, right? So keep in mind that for most of human history, all families have just stayed in a room together and slept in a room together until like 200 years ago. Would that only fuck someone up now, given these specific circumstances, which is you're watching on a video screen, it's high fidelity, you're seeing it and hearing it? Or did that fuck up every single kid throughout history that heard his parents doing it or like saw them doing it because you all literally are sleeping in the same bed in the year 1400 in the Middle Ages in England?
A lot of how we react around sexuality has to do with the cultural framing. Another piece of Cal that this is my theory on him is that I don't think he's coming out. I don't think he's gay. I think he sleeps with men also. So for most of human history, you may sleep with mostly men, sometimes women, all women, one or two guys, no guys. Being gay is a construct that's about as new as sleeping in separate rooms. Sexuality is always framed by the cultural context. I don't know that the kids in 1400 were fucked up. because of it.
I also think there's a difference between overhearing your parents have sex and watching DVDs of your dad having illicit affairs with underage people.
Did you know how Billie Eilish came out recently and said that she started watching porn when she was 12 and she thought it basically ruined her brain? From what I've read, it sounds like the main traumatic part is that he saw it. And then the smaller traumatic part is that it was his dad.
I think Val's point about the personal aesthetics being mediated by the internet is a really interesting point. And I think that that is true of some of the sexuality on the show too. That's sexuality mediated by technology and only visual and able to be seen because of technology.
With Cassie and McKay in the first season, the first time they hook up, he's immediately starting to choke her and she has to tell him to stop. That is what they have all seen that women like.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot.
It is discussing this idea of what the internet has done to people's brains and what the internet has done to aesthetics. They are emulating what they see. So they dress like porn stars and act like porn stars to each other, and it's bad.
I don't think it's a show about social commentary at all, and I do not think art ever has to give social commentary to be valid, but I feel like the show wants to make a point about that way more than it does about drug use or other things. Drugs and people's involvement with selling or taking, complete ambiguity about that in the show, but I do think it is trying to say a little bit about how we're so mediated by technology now. Like I said, it's certainly not on a moral platform as a show, and I don't think it needs to be in order to be valid.
I just want to say one thing about Lexi, which is I really identified with her. I mean, that was basically me in high school. And I don't know if I told the story before, but when I was 13, a somewhat popular boy asked me to go with him, and I assumed he was messing with me. So I went and asked my parents that night, and they're like, sure. And then the next day he never brought it up again. But like, my default from watching TV was I was always scared someone was going to prank me and like, ask me on a date, and it was a joke. So I was like always on guard. So when she's at the party and Fesco's talking to her and saying she's really interesting, she's like, I am?
I love that scene.
He's like, why do you always do that? Why do you always like act like the things you say are stupid? She's like, I do?
It is tough though to be thinking about these shows. You're like, who would I be in this world? And you're like,
we'd all be Lexi.
We'd all be Lexi. But in my so-called life, I'm like, oh, I'm like Sharon or Brian Krakow. I know it.
Definitely, I think we're all Brian Krakow.
God damn it. No one wants to be Brian Krakow. Fuck.
Wasn't he like really smart and destined for Harvard or something though?
That's right. But he was a real ween.
You know, the only thing I've ever seen that actor in again was The L Word. And he's one of the only boyfriends. Alice is the one bisexual character in The L Word. And she's had two boyfriends, him and Donald Faison. That's the only other thing I've seen that Brian Krakow actor.
He didn't even have a highlighted link on Wikipedia. I was like, gosh. By the way, so we all know that Claire Danes was 15 when the show was filming. Would you like to guess how old Jared Leto was? He was 23.
Ah!
Yeah.
Oh, because she's like my age. So, is he almost 50?
Yeah.
Oh.
No, he looks so good. I mean,
Oh.
if anyone in that show, he really is the one who's become
A megastar. Hats off to those casting people.
right?
I mean, God, I think people still know what Jordan Catalano means.
Right.
Like they may not know exactly what My So-Called Life is, but I think Jordan Catalano has had lasting impact.
That character is so much like the James Franco character from Freaks and Geeks. And those two actors, I almost get them confused too.
He's so cute.
So boyishly, like so perfectly.
Pretty. He's very pretty. And that is something that I think all teen boy heartthrobs have in common. Feminine features. He is beautiful and perfect boy you would have a crush on because he's mysterious. Oh, he's quiet. He doesn't say a lot. I bet he's quiet because he's always thinking. As you get older, you realize, no,
They can't think of anything to say.
Yeah, exactly. Your interiority is giving this person more credit than they maybe deserve. I did read that he was only supposed to be in one episode, which I can't believe. How could they not continue on with Jordan Catalano?
I was surprised that the guy playing Nate is Australian. He does barely talk, so. Oh, accent corner.
Speaking of accent corner, My So-Called Life is supposed to take place in Pittsburgh.
A fluffy suburb of Pittsburgh.
Yeah, they're not yinsing about.
I was gonna say they do not have Midwestern accents at all.
No Pennsylvania accents here.
I would believe Winnetka, Illinois, more than Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh seems a little bit more blue collar to me.
We have another segment called Adjacent TV, where we would say what shows are like these two shows. So for My So-Called Life, the obvious comparison is 30 something because they have the same production team and it kind of has the same tone and vibe.
And then we talked about this before, but
Freaks and Geeks,
Freaks and Geeks, yeah. It's much funnier. The pilot episodes are very similar, where it's the main girl leaves her old friend behind and falls in with a new, possibly bad crowd. There's more characters also in Freaks and Geeks, but there are some plots that have parallels. One being getting to know your crush. You've idolized this person. You've built up something about them. And then dating reality, it's maybe not as good as you thought it would be.
And both those shows were canceled prematurely.
Both just one season.
Well, do you want your mind blown that Freaks and Geeks is the bridge of this show? Because Lexi is played by Maude Apatow, Judd Apatow's daughter. And in Lexi's play, which is the most recent episode, it's actually called The Theater and Its Double. They actually take a scene from Freaks and Geeks, the yearbook pictures, and reenact it with the kids from Euphoria.
Another show that I thought of that I think has similar themes is Pen 15.
Oh, yes. 90s too.
And it's about teens sort of navigating, they're changing bodies, they're changing relationships. Again, I've never been cool, so I think I relate more to the Pen 15 girls than I do to even Angela is too cool for me.
So we have a section that we always fail to prepare the guests for, Nicole, which is coming up with a Mad Magazine parody title for this show.
Oh my gosh.
For My So-Called Life, I have My Sucky Life.
I have My Slow Stalled Life.
Well, the next section is easy for you to participate in, which is what was the most 90s thing about My So-Called Life?
Oh my God, everything. The clothes.
I was going to say flannel. There's a lot of flannel.
Yep.
I just put down Juliana Hatfield. Spin the Bottle was such a great song, but I also loved her song, My Sister. I hate my sister. She's a bitch. Love it. I remember the first time I heard that on the radio, it was like electricity.
My opinionation is where we give final summation, thumbs up, thumbs down. Do we recommend it? And then what would we do to improve? We can talk about both shows. We're all thumbs up for both shows.
I don't know if I'm a thumbs up for Euphoria, honestly. I'm like a middle.
Maybe I'm middle too.
Yeah. Although what's funny is that I feel like Euphoria is more consistent than My So-Called Life, because My So-Called Life does have some real stinker episodes. The Christmas episode is a real low point, and then the Halloween episode is also a real low point. 2 holidays and 2 ghosts. So
when you were describing the Christmas episode and you're like, it's a homeless girl who turns out to be a homeless ghost, I'm like, yes, that you summed up how pathetic that episode was in one sentence. Yeah,
it's true.
It's a homeless ghost.
That would be my suggestion for My So-Called Life, is to stay away from the supernatural.
Leave it to Touched by an Angel.
Leave it to Touched by an Angel. Everything else is pretty unimpeachable. It still holds up really well, although some things do feel kind of quaint, because I feel like as a culture, we have experienced a lot more. The reactions to certain dramas do seem a little naive now, but I don't think that's a failing of the show. I think it's just part of the time period it's coming out of. But yeah, truly get those ghosts out of there. It's not a genre show. This is about a teen girl. We don't need ghosts.
I think I haven't seen enough of Euphoria to really make a full judgment. It's obviously a very well done, very well acted prestige drama. But for me, my interests lie in end of the world, sci-fi thriller, robots with white blood.
Sounds like you really like My So-Called Life too then.
In one of the articles we read, critics rewatch My So-Called Life, timeless classic or teenage wasteland, and it's from the Hollywood Reporter. It's two journalists, Inku Kang and Daniel Feinberg, talking about My So-Called Life, both of them kind of watching it for the first time, and one of them is older than the other one. And the woman, Inku Kang, continues to complain about its treatment of gay characters. And I'm like, lady, listen, if you're going to be in the criticism game, you have got to learn how to look at something through a contemporary lens. Like, she just could not think of anything else to say about it besides that Ricky should have gotten more screen time and it should have done this about Ricky and that about Ricky. I'm like, Ricky was a breakthrough character. It was 1994. Like, give me a break.
She also had a complaint about how the cast wasn't diverse. And I was like, Ricky is a person of color and gay. The first gay main cast member on a TV show ever. And you're complaining about the diversity on the show. Think about it a little bit more, I think.
No, I felt like she was being a little disingenuous.
I did actually want to point out that 1994 was the first year of both UPN and the WB. 1994 was when the show debuted. I do think that this show would have been perfect for those networks.
Oh, yeah.
One, it was ahead of its time, truly. And also, it was on ABC, which might not have been a great match.
I watched it when it came over to MTV and I thought it was on MTV because it seems like a cable television show.
Exactly. I think that is part of why it didn't last. And also it shows that it was this precursor to all of this other programming to follow it. This was the tip of the teen iceberg because you've got My So-Called Life and then bam, the WB just explodes that game.
I sort of feel like My So-Called Life, Gossip Girl, and Euphoria are the three touchstones for teen programming right now. And Euphoria is perfectly placed on HBO. I think it actually carries the imprint of HBO and A24 more than it does teen programming.
The amount of dicks you see on Euphoria just really,
oh my God,
it really is using HBO's,
full dick budget.
All of their dick budgets. They are cashing in that dick budget.
I give both of them a thumbs up. Listeners, I recommend them both.
We have one segment left, which is just the simple, what you watching?
Mine is embarrassing. I really love all this high culture stuff, but I'm also a Bravo head. I'm watching Housewives Salt Lake, Miami, New Jersey, do the drag race thing. A friend recently got me into 90 Days, Love is Blind. That is trashy ass television.
I'm hard into ghosts. Did I already ask you who your favorite ghost was?
Oh, you haven't asked me what
my favorite ghost is the captain.
That's what I love so much about Ghosts, by the way. One, I'm just impressed by how many people are in that cast. There's just so many characters.
So I got Oscar into it because it's kind of safe for kids. And I was explaining to him and I was listing all the ghosts and I was like, dang, there's like 9 plus all the plague ghosts in the basement.
That's a big cast. The characters are so distinct and well formed. They'll introduce a premise. It's just so fun for all of the characters to react in different ways to it. I mean, I guess I like Kitty the best. I also like the Boy Scout guy.
Pat.
Wasn't
Euphoria based on a British?
No, Israeli.
Have you watched that?
I haven't, and I think it's really only tangentially based on it. Sam Levinson, Euphoria also is infused with a lot of his own life story. So there's like quite a few differences, but at some point I may go back and try and watch it.
Nicole, this has been a very enlightening.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
We were not running out of things to talk about.
No, definitely. This was really fun.
This has been Sliders and Wings with Val and Rachel. You can email us at slidersandwings@gmail.com and check out our Instagram, which is Sliders and Wings Pod.
Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you, Nicole.
All right. Talk to you guys soon.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.